Richard's name flashed across my phone 2 days before my wedding. I smiled as I answered, "Hi, Dad, I was just about to call you about rehearsal. I'm not walking you down the aisle." His voice was flat, almost rehearsed. I froze. "What? You heard me. Dad, what are you talking about?" There was a long pause before he finally said, "Your brother thinks it'll cause too much drama." I laughed once, thinking it had to be a joke. "What drama, Dad? It's my wedding." "I'm not discussing it." The line went quiet again. "So, you're really doing this?" I whispered. "Yes." Then he hung up. I stared at my phone, waiting for it to ring again, waiting for him to call back and say he'd overreacted. It never did. Instead, I called Mom. She answered on the second ring. "Mom, Dad just told me he isn't walking me down the aisle." "I knows. You knows. We've talked about it." My chest tightened. "So you're okay with this? You'll be fine on your own, Celine." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My own father doesn't want to walk me down the aisle, and you're telling me I'll be fine. "It'll be easier this way." "Easier for who?" She didn't answer. When she finally spoke again, her voice was almost pleading. "Please don't make this any harder than it already is." The call ended before I could ask the question that suddenly consumed every thought in my head. Harder for whom? The next 48 hours became a blur of flower deliveries, seating charts and forced smiles. Everywhere I turned, someone asked the same innocent question. "So excited to see your dad walk you down the aisle. When's your father getting into town? He's going to be so proud." Each question felt like another stone pressing against my chest. I texted Richard 3 times. "Can we please talk?" No response. I called twice. Straight to voicemail. Then Ethan finally sent me a message. "Stop making yourself the victim. Dad's decision is for the best." I read it over and over. For the best. No explanation. No apology. Just another reminder that somehow everyone had agreed on something I didn't understand. As the wedding morning arrived, I stood alone in the bridal suite, fastening the last button on my dress. My fiancé offered to walk with me instead. "I don't want your first memory of today to be fixing what my family broke," I told him gently. "If I have to walk alone, I will." Saying the words out loud hurt less than I expected. For the first time in my life, I stopped waiting for my father to choose me. The church buzzed with guests filling the pews, while my bridesmaids made nervous trips between the sanctuary and the bridal room. Someone knocked softly on the door. "I'll get it," one bridesmaid said. A moment later, she looked back at me with puzzled eyes. "Celine, there's someone here asking for you." I stepped into the hallway. An elderly man stood quietly near the entrance, dressed in a dark suit that looked carefully pressed despite its age. I recognized him instantly. Pastor Daniel, the minister who had baptized me, the man who had retired years earlier. He offered a gentle smile. "If you'll allow me," he said, "I don't think you should have to do this alone." I stared at him, completely caught off guard. Why had Pastor Daniel come, and why did he believe he should be the one to take my father's place? Pastor Daniel folded his hands in front of him, waiting patiently for my answer. "I know this is unexpected," he said softly, "but when I heard what happened, I couldn't stay home." I blinked back tears. "Who told you?" "A few old friends from the church. News like this travels faster than we'd like." He glanced toward the sanctuary, where guests were beginning to take their seats. No bride should have to wonder if she'll have to face that walk by herself. For a moment, I couldn't speak. Growing up, Pastor Daniel had always seemed to appear during the milestones that mattered. He was there when I graduated high school, standing in the crowd after Dad claimed he was too busy with work. When I finished college, Pastor Daniel congratulated me before my own father did. Even at my engagement celebration, he quietly offered a blessing while Richard spent most of the evening talking with Ethan. Back then, I had dismissed those moments as coincidence. Standing beside him now, they suddenly felt connected. I don't understand, I admitted. Why does this matter so much to you? His kind expression never changed. Because dignity matters, Celine. Before I could ask anything else, my mother stepped into the hallway. There you are, she said, stopping when she saw Pastor Daniel. Her face tightened instantly. I didn't expect you. I came because Celine shouldn't be alone, he replied. Mom looked directly at me. You don't need to make a bigger scene. A bigger scene? I asked, stunned. Dad already refused to walk me down the aisle. She lowered her voice. Today isn't the day. Then when is the day? After everyone asks why my father stayed in his seat. She looked away. There are things you don't understand. Then explain them. I can't. Pastor Daniel gently stepped between us, not aggressively but firmly. Whatever truths exist, he said, they don't belong in the hallway before her wedding. He turned back to me. What belongs today is respect. For the first time since Richard's phone call, I stopped asking my family to choose me. I looked at Pastor Daniel and nodded. I'd be honored if you walked with me. A warm smile crossed his face. So would I. Outside the bridal suite, the music began as guests settled into silence. Pastor Daniel offered me his arm. As I took it, he leaned close enough that only I could hear him. No matter what happens when those doors open, he said quietly, I'm not leaving your side. The first notes of the processional echoed through the church. Pastor Daniel gave my arm a reassuring squeeze. Ready? I took a slow breath. I am. The sanctuary doors swung open. Conversations stopped instantly. Dozens of faces turned toward us, smiling at first, until they realized the man beside me wasn't my father. A ripple of whispers swept across the pews. That's not Richard. Who is walking her? Where's her dad? I kept my eyes forward. Halfway down the aisle I saw him. Richard was sitting in the front pew, exactly where a father should have been moments earlier. The instant he recognized Pastor Daniel beside me, he shot to his feet. His face drained of color. For a brief second, it looked as though he might step into the aisle. Instead, he stood frozen, staring at us. Pastor Daniel never slowed his pace. His calm presence steadied me, while every pair of eyes in the church shifted between us and Richard. Near the front, Ethan abruptly stood. He forced a laugh that sounded painfully artificial. Everyone, don't misunderstand. He said loudly enough for nearby guests to hear. Celine decided to do this herself. She wanted to make a statement. Several heads turned toward him. An aunt frowned. What statement? Why isn't Richard walking his daughter? Another relative looked directly at my father. Did something happen? Richard said nothing. His silence answered more questions than any explanation could have. Pastor Daniel finally stopped beside me at the altar. Without raising his voice, he looked at Ethan. Not every story is the one you've been telling people. The words hung in the air. Ethan's confident expression faltered for the first time. Before anyone could press further, the officiant gently cleared his throat. We're here today to celebrate Celine and Michael. The ceremony continued. I focused on my vows, refusing to let the tension steal the day completely. By the time the reception began, however, the whispers had only grown louder. Small groups gathered around tables. I've never seen anything like it. There has to be more to this. Did Richard really refuse to walk her? As I thanked guests for coming, my elderly great-aunt Evelyn quietly touched my arm. She glanced toward Pastor Daniel across the room before looking back at me. My dear, she said softly, his being here means more than most people realize. Before I could ask what she meant, I heard raised voices across the reception hall. Richard had spotted Pastor Daniel speaking privately with several older relatives. Without saying a word to anyone else, Richard turned, walked straight out of the reception, climbed into his car and drove away. The room fell into stunned silence. Richard's empty chair at the reception became the center of every conversation. Guests tried to be discreet, but I caught fragments as they passed my table. Did they have an argument? I've never seen Richard leave like that. Something isn't adding up. I excused myself and found Pastor Daniel standing alone near the church garden, watching the evening sunlight fade. I need answers, I said quietly. Everyone keeps acting like there's something I should already know. He looked at me with genuine sympathy. There is, he admitted, but not tonight. I shook my head. My father refused to walk me down the aisle. He walked out of my wedding. How can tonight not be the night? Because this day should end with your marriage, not with decades of pain. His voice remained calm. You deserve one day that belongs to you. Before I could respond, Ethan stormed through the garden doors. You've said enough, he snapped at Pastor Daniel. I haven't said anything. Then keep it that way. The tension between them was impossible to ignore. My husband, Michael, had followed me outside just in time to hear the exchange. Ethan, Michael said evenly, why are you so afraid of whatever he's going to say? I'm not afraid, Ethan fired back, though his voice cracked. I'm protecting this family. Without waiting for another word, Ethan turned and disappeared back inside. Michael watched him leave before looking at me. That wasn't anger, he said quietly. That was panic. Later that evening, after most of the guests had left, Pastor Daniel asked if we could stop by the old church office before heading home. Inside, he unlocked a small wooden cabinet that hadn't been opened in years. From the back, he carefully removed a weathered envelope tied together with faded blue ribbon. I've kept these safe, he said. I promised someone I would. He handed them to me. The handwriting was unfamiliar, but the oldest letter was dated just weeks after I was born. Several more followed over the years. Every envelope carried my name. My pulse quickened. What are these? They're part of a story that began before you could remember, Pastor Daniel answered. As I stared at the dates, one thing became painfully clear. Whatever had shattered my family hadn't started with my wedding. It had started the day I entered their lives. Before Pastor Daniel could explain another word, the church office door swung open. Richard stood in the doorway, exhausted and pale. He looked from the letters to me. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he said, It's time she hears the truth from me.